building, which is strictly forbidden from the public, which happens to be the case of the Holy of Holies. It was a room that was strictly forbidden from all other temple personnel except for one person, the high priest, who would enter into the room once a year during a time in the Jewish calendar called Yom Kippur, Day of Atonement. So I had all these questions, and I had not considered Freemasonry as being the source of the inspiration behind the design, because for the most part, I thought if you'd ever mentioned Freemasonry to me, I would have thought you mean the shrine, the guys that drive around in little cars and have are called the stone cutters on The Simpsons.
Yeah, right.
And a kind of response like that. And so what I did is, I think about 4 years into my investigation, one of my advisors basically said, maybe these guys are Freemasons. I'm like, okay. So who are they? And I began swallowing up as much literature as I could on the subject, and realized, as I mentioned before, that it's mostly divided in two camps. One is, just a condemnation of the entire tradition, or Freemasonry is the greatest thing. So having, my approach at that point, I just graduated as from my BA in anthropology, and there's one thing that an anthropologist does when they want to investigate a foreign culture, which is they immerse themselves in that culture, partake of their food, drink their, participate in their rites, whatever. So I decided, well, what actually do these Masons do? I mean, what's the big deal here? So I joined.
Oh, there you go.
So I figured, okay, well, what actually do these people do? And I showed up at the Grand Lodge and said, all right, apparently you guys put your symbol on the back of the dollar bill and maybe built the legislative building in Winnipeg. But what actually do you do? And so I became a Mason and joined and went through. I don't think I ascended very far, and I don't think I've been a good Mason. I've only gone to a few meetings. But in the process of going through this very strange, basically a ritual drama that all revolves around the building of King Solomon's Temple, I thought that there were elements in the architecture of the building which made complete sense. They were previously anomalies, and they made complete sense only while I was actually going through this apparently old, ancient custom referred to as the mysteries. And so in my own way, I thought, I never would have considered Masonry as having been a source of inspiration behind this building until I actually got closer to what actually the organization does.
Yes. So, I mean, okay, some would obviously argue at this point then, those who take the conspiratorial viewpoint, that this will taint your kind of objectivity, so to speak. But where do you stand to these days in regards to, you're mentioning these two camps, that either they're the best thing or the worst thing? Where do you stand in regards to that now then?
It's a great question, and I think that in any subject, in any discipline, you always have this, whoever the author is, tainted by whatever it is that is their horizon of how they view it. And I think that is always the case in any piece of literature, whether it's some dry, pedantic academic treatise on the history of wooden shoes, or it's, an apology of Freemasonry or whatever. You're always going to have colored by the author's particular vision.
Sure.
And I think in this case, I could only say that to the best of my abilities, I've followed the most rigorous academic procedures, and mostly ruled by the Occam's razor. The least complicated path is probably the correct one. So if you have a very, very complicated idea that, the Templars built all of these churches and it forms this sacred grid all over the planet, to me that would be a very complicated answer to perhaps something that's much more easier to be explained by other means?
Yes.
It's a very good question, Heinrich. Absolutely. It's possible that, that this colors my research, but, initially, I'm almost embarrassed to admit this, but I just joined because I wanted access to the archives that
Sure.
would have been unavailable to me if I was just a regular Joe.
Well, of course,
so,
and that's
becoming a Mason, I was allowed access to the Grand Lodge archives in Manitoba, which allowed me to continue my research. So I guess you could say it was a bit of that was maybe a selfish reason for joining.
well, it's an understandable, way of doing it, so to speak. I definitely understand it, to gain the access and gain the knowledge, if you will. One thing that pops up again here then is obviously I've heard from let's take sources like Albert Pike, for instance, in Morals and Dogma, where we talk about different
Right.
levels of dissemination of the information,
Yeah.
meaning that on one level you might actually given one message, so to speak, but on another level, higher up in the degrees or what have you, you actually are given access to another set of information regarding a symbol or a specific meaning of a ritual or an initiation. What do you think? What do you think that has to do with this? Could it be that you actually, although you are a Freemason, are not given or privy to all the information that is in there? What do you think?
Okay. Now, just as a caveat to that, it was there was another Canadian Masonic scholar by the name of Manly P. Hall that mostly championed that idea that basically Freemasonry was a kind of system of mysteries that you did not know the next level of the mystery unless you kind of ascended through the ranks.
Yes.
And I think on the subject of Albert Pike, I have to say that he is, I think, thrown around way too loosely as being a kind of, one of the grand supreme magus of all of Freemasonry. And this isn't entirely true. He had an enormous impact, and it was of noted importance on the dissemination of Scottish Rite ritual in the southern jurisdiction in the United States. He is a Masonic pundit par excellence in the United States, but he is at all no representative of world Freemasonry as he's often described. And if you read any conspiracy book on the Freemasons, Albert Pike is always right in there right away, and you hear about him, extolling Luciferian energies and that he is this world supreme grand magus of all Freemasonry.
Mm.
And, this isn't representative at all of Freemasonry. And for the most part, most people don't even know that there aren't just 33 degrees. There are thousands of degrees.
Probably, yeah.
Thousands. Maybe something like 1,200 different degrees.
Mm.
And so, for instance, even in your country, which in fact probably, in my opinion, has the oldest and perhaps the most authentic ritual degree system of Freemasonry. In your country, it's a 7-degree system. It's not a 33-degree system. It's not a 3-degree system as it is here in the UK. And there isn't these deviant, spurious rites. There are seven degrees, and your particular Grand Lodge archive is very hush-hush on the nature of the system there. And from as far as I can gather, I think probably is the most authentic representation of Freemasonry from this transition from what's often called operative Freemasonry into
Yes.
what is called speculative Freemasonry.
Yes.
And so, anyways, there are hundreds of degrees. Some degrees have women. Some degrees invoke angels. Some degrees use Kabbalistic formulas. Some degrees have alchemy, all of which Albert Pike would not have known about and did not spend his time discussing. And so certainly the core of your statement to me rings true, that there are elements within the craft that the mystery unfolds as you move through the grades.
Sure.
But a lot of those grades and a lot of the rituals, like, say, the 33-degree system, they were inventions. They were, inventions in the 18th century, early 19th century, like John Yarker. There many figures that were these disseminators of Masonic rituals, but they actually wrote them. Now, in terms of like kind of authenticity of early operative masonry, I mean masonry that we know was involved, were responsible for some of the great cathedrals in Europe, and that there were certain password signs and tokens that the various grades needed to know in order to ascend up those ranks. That transition into speculative Freemasonry, to me, is much more interesting, and as far as we could tell, it was probably a 3 or perhaps 4 degree system, and perhaps, if anything, maybe something closer to the system of rites that you have in Sweden.
That is interesting, and I actually did only know or think that there was only 3 degrees in Sweden, or at least the 3 different lodges with the St. Andreas Lodge, you have the Johannes Lodge, and then you have the one initiatory, I think, degree step or lodge or whatever. But 7, that was interesting. Okay, I need to check up on that. And
yes.
And then,
there were rites that were done in a grotto, in a garden setting. There were rites that were done in a subterranean cavern. There were rites that were done in a whole host of ways. And for instance, one particular, in my opinion, which has a clear line of lineage to the design of the Manitoba Legislative Building, is the history of the floor cloth. Now, are you familiar with this particular Masonic paraphernalia?
Remind me and our listeners about it, if you will.
Okay, well, basically, the floor cloth is this a rug, a type of rug that around the 18th century what designated the sacred space of the lodge. Now, there wasn't such a thing as temples or lodges in the 18th century, and most people, for instance, in the time of the Enlightenment, that gravitated towards Freemasonry were scientists, poets, engineers, philosophers, and some of the greatest minds of that period had gravitated towards Freemasonry. It was a time of total explosion. And so what would happen is that Freemasons would meet in a tavern or somebody's home. And in order to designate the sacred space of the lodge, they would initially draw in chalk on the floor the various orientations, the position of east, and certain signs that would be traced onto the floor that would basically indicate they were like mnemonic devices, kind of memory devices that would allow the ritual procedure to move forward. So kind of like cue cards if ever a person got stuck on their lines. Now, and so what happened was, because there were papal bans against Freemasonry in 1738, I believe there was one, and I think 5 years earlier. So the Pope had completely denounced Freemasonry as being entirely diabolical, whatever, and it would lead to error and sin. And so what would happen was that Masons would meet in a place that was designated by this tracing board, and if ever the cops were to show up, they could quickly, or would I'm making kind of jest here, they could just quickly erase the tracing, and it's just basically a tavern room. And then what would happen is that they developed these cloths where they would roll the cloth out, and the cloth would have various different signs that would indicate that degree. So in the first degree, there would be a particular cloth. The second degree, there would be a particular cloth with various signs that would be symbolic of that degree. And so what would happen here at this time is that there wasn't actually any formation of a Grand Lodge yet. There were no designs for lodges, whatever. So they needed to designate the sacred space in a symbolic way. And Masons were involved, some of them, at least in France and Germany, in